again, look, your testimony just a moment ago, you talked about how the USCA has assisted in the resolution of 781 abduction and access cases. Can you tell us how many of those cases deemed resolved were actually returns?
I do not have that number, but I can get it for you. I mean, because resolved cases to us are returns, either voluntary or court-ordered, or or the case has been closed either by the parents or because the child has aged out and has become a different kind of case for us. It's not that we're forgetting about
no, I asked that because even like an aging out issue at 16 for Hague countries, for example, what they tried and have done to so many of the abducted parents globally, including those whose children were taken to Japan. David Goldman's case was they were running the clock on that one to try to get Sean to 16. It would be and I would hope the press would take note of this, it's wrong to talk about that as resolution without delineating how many of those children came home. Could you, maybe someone could
I'm gonna
get that to us before the hearing's over?
That number probably tomorrow or Friday.
Any chance of getting it now? Somebody back
I don't think we have it. I'm sorry. I didn't know that you were going to go into the numbers.
Well, that is all important because the headline of 781 resolved cases does sound very efficacious and very encouraging. But again, when you talk about aging out or a parent who after a year hasn't been in touch with the department and he or she, the mom or dad, find out that, that they've been dropped, we've been very concerned, and we hear from the parents that they're so concerned about drop cases. I want to know how many came back.
I'm going to get you that number.
And none from Japan, as far as you know, right?
As far as I know, there have been none from Japan, but there was a court-ordered return just last month.
On the visitation issues, you point out, and properly so, as I mentioned in my opening comments, about how with Japan, even on the access cases, 31 convention access applications, none of those have been honored either. And that is outrageous. A year later, and I sat in that meeting, and the left behind parents meeting with Japanese officials a year ago next week were like the ultimate diplomats. I was boiling listening. They were respectful on the other side of that table, but it was like, please, I've been in this business for too long, 35 years as a member of Congress. Let's talk resolution. And there was talk of endless delay. And now a year later, none of those access cases even have occurred.
I know that it's frustrating, and we share your frustration, and these are issues that we continue to raise with the Japanese. We talked to them in September. There was an International Visitor Leadership Program in February, and then another visit from the Foreign Ministry, and we have raised these concerns at every one of those meetings, and we plan to go back in June. And I talked to Ambassador Kennedy yesterday, and she is energized and she is ready to launch.
If I could ask you, in terms of the return, if you could give us that information for each country. I mean, Japan, India, it was the NCMEC, the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, that said the number is 64. Bindu Phillips, who will testify, sitting right directly behind you, almost 7 years. Matter of fact, she not only has had her children kidnapped, as Eamon Blanchard, who is a police officer who's with her today, as the Plainsboro police have documented, there's been one violation of her rights. Money was taken, all the furniture was cleared out, loans. It was a very high level fraud. In addition to, she was broke after this happened by the abducting father, and back in India, she's being frustrated beyond words. And as you know, and this goes for Japan, it goes for any country, Section 201 makes clear that determination of action by the Secretary of State for each abduction or access case relating to child whose habitual residence in the U.S. that remains pending or is otherwise unresolved on the date that is 12 months after the date on which the central authority of the U.S. submits such a case to a foreign government, the Secretary shall determine whether the government of such foreign country has failed to take appropriate measures, and then he is then expeditiously as practicable, told, admonished, delineated in the law to take one or more actions described in Section 202, which is the sanctions provisions. It seems to me you have a textbook engraved invitation to be serious in implementing this law, to say, Japan, we could take any one of these cases. Paul Tolan, he served in Yokohama as in the Navy, and he is the only surviving parent, not unlike David Goldman, because his wife had passed away, and he, like the others, live in agony over the loss of their child. She's, I think, now 11, his little daughter. That is a textbook case for us to say, Section 201, Japan, we're going to use this. Because, again, the access cases should be a clear suggestion, if one is needed, that Japan is not living up to the letter or the spirit of comments that have been made, as well as signatories to the Hague Convention. And in their case, they're excluded and not included in its implementation by definition. So if you could take back and maybe respond to it now, could you use Section 201 for Bindu Phillips? Or for Paul Toland, or any of the left-behind Japanese parents whose children were abducted to Japan?
Absolutely, because we do it now. We have not waited for that year to run. We raise these cases constantly, especially with the countries that you have named, in an effort to resolve the cases.
Can I
tell you that I share your frustration?
Good, thank you. Can I just say, and I really believe there needs to be a look at, there are a number of tools in the toolbox in terms of sanctions. Look at the sanctions that will have bite. The marsh is a good shot across the bow, but that's all it is. And you've done that with Brazil, for example. But I think the next step has to be, okay, you've not resolved these cases. And you tweeted back in 2011 how you've put together a working group in Brazil. Is there any fruit to that effort? Are people coming home? Children?
Let me express my frustration with our progress with Brazil. Okay. I have made 6 visits to Brazil, and we've had one return, and it isn't enough. But we have had a breakthrough, and I've been invited to go back and to meet with judges to express our frustration, because in Brazil, that is where the problem is. And we've invited judges up here. We had 10 judges here in September. We're putting together another program for judges, and we are looking at every way we can. The ambassador is very engaged. We are trying to work with the Brazil Central Authority, a very responsive organization, to get the judges to implement the convention the way it's written.
When Secretary Kerry testified on February 25th before our full committee, I asked him specifically about the meeting with Prime Minister Modi by both himself in January and, of course, the President of the United States, Barack Obama. And I asked whether or not child abduction cases had been raised, and I'm not sure he answered it, and I have deep respect for the Secretary, but he said any time that I visit, either home or go somewhere, we meet at high levels, we raise these issues by name. I'm not sure he raised Bindu's case or any of these cases, but my question to you is, it would be nice to have clarification on that, but in our newfound relationship with the Modi government, is this an issue at the top, along with other issues at the top? If we can't speak out for abducted children, American children, who will? It
is an issue at the top, and let me assure you that...
Did President Obama raise it?
I don't know, because...
Could you get back to us on that for the record?
I'm going to be really honest with you. I don't know if that information will be given to me. But what I can assure you of is that when we learn that high-level people, including the Secretary and the undersecretaries, are traveling to countries where we have problems with abduction cases, we put something into their briefing book so that they will raise this issue.
And I deeply appreciate that, but the question is it delivered, or is it on page 5 of what they find and they never get to it?
It is.
We found that with David Goldman at first. There was, there was pickets out in front of the White House to try to get a focus when Lulu, the president of Brazil, was coming, And finally, at long last, it was raised. We're not sure if it was an afterthought or a real, I mean, foreign leaders, as we all know, look our foreign leader in the eyes and say, is this of high importance, or you're just putting a little check in the box? And I would hope there's nothing secretive as to whether or not the meeting with Prime Minister Modi, and this would go for the Prime Minister of Japan and every other meeting, this has to be front and center. And now sanctions ought to be utilized. If we use sanctions, and I made this point when I did the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, if you don't use the sanctions, this becomes an unimplemented law and a toothless piece of legislation. They have to know it's a priority, and the meting out of sanctions, and I mean real sanctions, would immediately cause them to wake up, and you will have tremendous successes on your hands with children brought home.
If I might, I can tell you that I have already had some successes in just the threat of sanctions invoking this law. In recent meetings in Guatemala and Honduras, where we have had very little success on abduction cases, we got their attention, and now there is going to be far better cooperation.
That's encouraging, but those are very small countries that can be more easily persuaded, to use a diplomatic term. Intimidated might be a better word.
No.
But the big countries, Japan, India, this has to be far more
Absolutely. I am planning to go to India in May, to Japan in June, and to talk about the report. The Indians don't want to be cited, and I do think that public shaming is a very good thing for countries that are not doing the right thing.
Can we expect India will be on the noncompliance?
We haven't put together the
Non-cooperation, I
list,
should
but
say.
I don't think you'll be
Non-cooperation.
disappointed.
Okay, let me, also in your testimony you say, as we execute the new requirement to inform members of Congress directly of new IPCA cases, let me just say, the language is clear that all cases should be informed. Is there a more narrow reading of the text? I mean, a new case, I mean, all of the old Japanese cases, some of them are 10 years old. It would seem to me, and I've asked many members of Congress, is there anybody in your district that you know of? And one after the other, it's a blank stare. No, nobody's contacted me. Are you informing all people that their congressmen and 2 senators could be tremendous advocates for the return of their children, or access, or both?
We are, in April, we will begin the notification process to members of Congress. We have had to work through other laws to make sure that we are doing the right thing, and we will begin doing that in April.
Okay.
And thank you for that question.
Okay, and it'll include old and new cases?
It'll
Not just
include
since
all the
enactment.
cases for which we have permission to give them information.
Okay, that's good. So strike that new word in the... Ms. Bass.